Hey, Claudia, thank you for coming in today. You really have an interesting background and you come highly recommended because you're very multidimensional in your thinking. So I appreciate you coming in and sharing your insights with our audience.
Thank you so much for having me. It's incredible to have this opportunity, and I cannot wait to share what I want to do with the world and how a bit of about my path and how I connect to everything you've been doing. Yeah.
So, you're on your journey and both on a professional, personal basis. And there are inflection points in everybody's journey that really made them who they are today and what you plan to do in the future. And those are kind of like three magic points in your life. So what do you think are those three inflection points, or maybe two? And it could have been when you're really young. Maybe when you were 3 or 5. It could have been somebody in the family, outside the family. It could be something in school. What are those three defining moments in your life that are shaping you today and into the future?
Well, I think I'm going to start with when I was a little kid and naturally wanting to investigate the world. And one inflecting point was then I realized that I had a great understanding of everything that had a pattern around me. And I was so deeply fascinated by it that I wanted to explain things about that to everyone around me, and I realized that it was an asset that I could actually make people learn something that they hadn't seen before by themselves. And I guess that led on to me wanting to use that tool to make little models of every behavior that, every pattern that happened in my surrounding. And so that set up the base for my basic passion for physics in general, and then mathematics. But I still have a hard time um, just categorizing areas based on the way they are taught at school, because to me it's just frequency of patterns and things like that. And I would say a second point, which is then completely connected to the previous one, is as a game when I was trying to predict any situation that was also very linked to how people naturally feel about how a situation might become, then at that moment I started facing just natural human behavior and the way it completely opposed different. I mean that I started facing biases and um, and the way that someone can completely change their view about something they have witnessed and observed based on how they feel about it at that moment. And so I started asking myself questions about, obviously, I also have those biases. How do I integrate those immediate biases into all these pattern-making processes that I had witnessed before? I mean that for predicting the outcome of a game, if you're seeing that someone is really strong at a game and you think, oh, it's going to win, then so if you look at other more predictive things to see, you merge very two different things, and so that has been another start to what I was really fascinated about. And and then now a third point is more recently, I guess, when I realized that there are many things which I'm observing that are extremely hard to study or that have not been completely developed yet. I'm extremely excited by the development of neuroscience, and yet I know that we're so far away from really developing a broad comprehension of the subject. At the same time, it's really fascinating. And yes, it also makes me plunge into the depth of what tools should we use? Should I keep using this very mathematical way of seeing patterns and seeing every event? And I connect it to all the tools that are available today, which are AI, computer science, and yeah. So now is my main phase of trying to merge everything together.
So Claudia, what I'm hearing then is that you realized when you were very young that you had the ability to just to see correlations and patterns and just the way that your brain works, and that led you to have an interest in things like physics and mathematics and so on. But you also came to the realization of the impact of biases and so forth, and you had quite a bit of curiosity about how that impacts things that are happening. For example, there's bias in AI, but it also expanded your interest into the neurosciences and how, again, I guess how the brain sees things. So you were very much interested in the abstract and theoretical parts of science and experimentation, and you're now looking at taking that further in your studies. So, what are you currently studying in your schooling?
In my schooling right now, I'm doing 2 degrees differently. I'm doing mathematics. I'm also doing physics. And I'm also doing philosophy on the side, just because it's a little bit of a breath of fresh air sometimes. And I would do it in my spare time anyway. But I had to choose which subjects were the most interesting to study at university, because I tend to get interested into many subjects by myself. But like psychology, I know that it's way smoother for me to studying it by myself, even though I might add it to my studies later. But yeah, I know that all the everything that I perceive and mathematics is just a tool to make you more precise, to merge all of your knowledge together, and to I was telling about biases, but when you study physics, if you just get stuck at your intuition, you don't go very far. And so studying those in a university concept, yeah, you just have to be strict about it, and it forces you to push your understanding of how do you think, how do you perceive, how do you set up a project, push those abilities, and yeah, it's I'm loving my decision.
So that's interesting. I mean, you have an interest in philosophy and psychology and neuroscience, and you're obtaining degrees in mathematics and physics because you realize credentialing is important in terms of what you want to pursue. But you also work on experiments and use tools on your own. Can you talk about some of the tools that you use and that you find really interesting? And integral to this is things like bias that you mentioned earlier. Are you using sort of common platforms? Are you doing anything in open source, for example, in GitHub? You know, there's Mistral. You know, they just released another iteration of their large language models, the Mixtral. Are you playing with some of that? Are you uh, playing with some of the things that are available from Microsoft or some of the big vendors, or you know, and what are the tools that you're working with and that you're exploring?
So in terms of anything computer science related, I just love playing with anything that pops up, anything that is that I start to see happening. And in general, it's more about keeping up my knowledge of all the new things, all the new tools that happen, and me asking myself, what are the possibilities? What can I do with it? But the goal is always is never to just know what a tool is and develop it a little bit more. I'm much more comfortable when I have several tools, and then because I know what they could be used for, I use them all for a bigger project. And lately had been focused on things that mainly used pure just observation and more studying about human behavior. So I had a little bit of a time where I was using different tools, and I think it also was after COVID where I just starting developing more of those more human to human tools. But it was a step outside of my comfort zone, and I'm definitely more comfortable using computer science tools. Um, and I'm keeping a close eye on what's happening in AI, because it feels like there are to me, it's still developing kind of close to what obvious possibility of AI are. And I see little amazing possibilities using AI happening. But yes, right now I'm just still looking at merging an idea that could be nice and great with those incredible computer science tools that are happening right now. Yeah.
On those computer science tools, though, I mean, are you using specific like what tools would you recommend for or people in the audience who want to try going on the journey that you're going on? So, uh, so we could even get into math tools. What kind of math tools do you use? You know, math software packages or exploratory tools that people can use, or in physics. Also on the human interaction, you know, what kinds of things do you like to use? And then on the AI and machine learning, what kind of tools do you use? So tools is such a generic term. And then you find that some are better than others, and which ones are those? Are there communities out there where there's like-minded people where you can engage with those communities? Who are those communities? I mean, I come from the Microsoft community, so you know, there's GitHub, uh, but GitHub is kind of pretty open. Um, are there specific communities tools that you can mention that you think you find quite favorable? I mean, there's Python, which is readily used, a lot of libraries within that language and that sort of ecosystem. Are there specific things that you find quite useful to you?
Um, uh, I would definitely recommend GitHub. I had a long phase of using it a lot. And I know it's going to be slightly off subject, but I'm just going to talk about what I used in the last 2 or 3 years, which were the fact that when you are not using all the tools that naturally come with your human abilities, it makes you less effective as your way of thinking becomes less effective. And so I had been working more about on how can I maximize the way I think? How can I maximize my own mind? What can be done with a human? How much can you change? And so the tools that I used for that were mainly reading every bit of research available for that. And but I guess this question about what can be done by humans was directly linked to the huge development of computer science tools. Because I felt like there was such a burst in that direction that was beyond exciting, but that because I'm still studying right now, I could take part in, but not as actively as I wanted to. So I thought it was extremely interesting to look at the opposite part that was also exploding with possibilities, and trying to merge, trying to reach a point where anything that could be related to the human mind could be as precisely understood as the laws of physics. That is still a big dream. So, but I also know that in the next few years, probably I'm going to switch to more traditionally engineering tools and assets, because I've also mainly reached the goal of being able to systematize all knowledge that I have. I wanted to be able to tell how every little system works. And yeah, I was just focused on how can you make humans fitted to whatever evolution, quick evolution in computer science or elsewhere. How can you push societies? How can you push politics? And how can you acquire good data? And overcoming those psychological biases that are everywhere in politics and in general societal decision. How can you push that over and acquire more better data to have some basic ground to then use any computer science tools on.
So, so what I'm hearing is that you've done a lot of exploration by reading on the research that are in different frontier areas, where it's mathematics or physics or computing science, human interaction, psychology, philosophy. And you've been thinking in terms of all of the reading that you've done. And you're thinking of maybe going into an applied area as well. So adding applied education to the education that you've already got, so that you can get into maybe the practical aspects of all of your interests, because you have a very diverse set of interests. I also note that you always had a deep interest in theoretical science. I mean, you indicated that even when you were really young, because of the ability for you to see patterns, and it's just a natural part or byproduct of how you think. And but you like things that are very have depth and complexity and so on as well. But you like the precision part. That's what mathematics and physics gives you. I noticed in your profile, though, you also indicated you pivoted to architecture after high school. Did you continue with the architecture part, or what is the nature of the architecture interest? And have you pivoted away from architecture into mathematics and physics? I mean, what's happening? Because I see all this intersection of different areas. So,
Well, the architecture choice was more about the fact that I knew that everything that I had been interested in ever since I was a kid, I had learned by trial, error, and also creating big projects, having a lot of time to answer complex questions. And I wanted to still be in touch with many areas of knowledge. Architecture allowed me to do that because it was just, let's say it's just an applied project. You apply all of your knowledge of structural technical studies and what kind of architecture is it a good idea to build in for a town, for a city? How do you develop that city? What does it mean to feel comfortable? No, it was a general way of having a lot of freedom, being given a leading role just after high school. Yeah, it was just a general place where I was just trusted to make big project and to think by myself and to learn by myself. And so even though I was not learning the core subject, which was architecture, I learned way more about how to lead projects and in science in general, just because I had time to learn by myself and to be given the means. I guess I could have done that. I didn't know any type of school which was fitted to leading projects, but no, I've not been back to architecture just because it was a bit the simple way of getting into many questions that I was interested in, but it was just a little project that I haven't found any interested in since. And in general, I would love to keep applying my skills to real projects. I love to adapt to new situations. And so if a team has found a project that they know is a good spot in the general market or general knowledge market or something, just a general good idea that they think they want to develop, that would definitely be something that I know would feel completely natural getting on with, because I know that I've now reached a moment where I've started looking for which area have a gap that where there's a bit of a knowledge lacking, or a project that can be made, or an area that could be developed. So I've slowly started looking for that, and I know that if I find something that fits right with my interest, I'm going to start a project like that. But it will also be completely comfortable for me to join a team, to still be developing abilities to lead large projects, of course.
Yeah, I'm contemplating all of the things that you talked about, right? So, and just to kind of sum it up, you always had an early interest in science, and you had the ability to see patterns and so on from a very early age. And and a deep interest in science and deep science. And you acquired a lot of these skills just through self-learning. Um, and you then attended architecture. You took architecture because it gave you some structure in terms of, let's say, if you had to do a project. And architecture has engineering elements, it has artistic elements, it's very multidisciplinary in many respects. So, which would fit this sort of polymath aspect of who you are. You have many, many different interests. You like to go deep in all of these areas. And so, what architecture gave you was exposure to project management and integrating all of these different modalities into a way that you could apply as a skill set to other things you're working on. However, you didn't find that that was your true calling. Architecture, in that fact, became a tool. So when you mention the tool, you're really talking about tools of knowledge that you can then apply. I was thinking specifically like a software tool, but you're actually really, these tools are different knowledge areas that you're acquiring, and then that's why you decided to turn your interests into things like physics and areas such as that, and mathematics, because again, they're tools. So mathematics is a tool. The things that you're learning in physics are a tool. The things that you're learning in philosophy are tools. So I see what you mean by tools. You're gathering a set of knowledge sets where you can then conduct your own experiments and do visualizations and think about executing by integrating these different elements. So am I right? So your tools are really these different pieces of knowledge that you're gaining.
Absolutely. I believe that in general, my area of comfort is with quite high abstraction, things that are completely abstract, but then to know whether something that you kind of perceive is true or not, you have to make experiments. And I also think that my choice for going to architecture is to confront myself to something that was not abstract at all, and to get myself out of my comfort zone. Because all the things that I actually learned during architecture school, which was the fact that building anything takes way longer than what you could ever have imagined, is a lesson that for the way I am when I'm in my most natural comfort zone, I would have never learned that type of lesson just staying in my space. And so the more I confronted myself to real life applications of what feels extremely natural, the more it became interesting. Because if you're just lost in a realm of abstraction and not anything having a meaning, then you start you want to have a general goal. You want to have a meaning of why you are perceiving these things. Why are you making the models? How can I express them? How can I make them useful for other people? And then that's how you start asking yourself, okay, how is the craftsman near my street? How do they think? How can I be useful to them? How can I connect myself? And so I choose my projects also based on when I notice a lack of reality, perhaps in my understanding, or when I notice that, oh, there's this general area that I see that there might be some connection, I'm going to try and apply that. And so, when I see, I don't know, questions that everyone thinks that they might be too difficult to solve, I don't know, like bringing internet to every person in the world in every little location. How do we do that? It's still general problems that are still, it's just a simple question. You have no, in the beginning, a few years ago, you had no idea how to put that into action. And that's where I want to put my energy into project that you never know if they might happen someday. I tend to do that by myself anyway, and it would make me just really happy doing that with a real team. Or anyway, I know I'll keep studying until I can find a project that I can lead by myself, but until then, if I find something else, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I definitely have a much better understanding of what you're trying to do. So you have this tool set of abstraction and theory across many, many different areas. And then architecture served its purpose because it's a very concrete, a very applied way of taking theory and applying it to something practical. And so that's why you were interested in adding that skill set, the practicality skill set. So you spent a fair amount of time, though, in the theoretical and the abstraction of looking how all of these different areas correlate in some way, seeing the patterns across all of these knowledge bases. And then you've added this element of being able to say, okay, now they give me a project where I can take all of this broad knowledge and abstractions and theoretical knowledge, and I can apply it. And you've done some studies to do that. So I understand now what your process is. And, I did an interview and I did a series of joint keynotes with Roger Penrose. And in fact, I did a Vienna joint keynote with them where I keynoted first and he did it later. And then I did one at AI for Good in 2018 where I was the moderator. I introduced them and then handled the Q&A for the opening keynote for AI for Good. But right after that, we had a joint session with another UN group. In fact, on the same day, and it was about 90 minutes long, maybe a little bit under, where I chaired that session with Roger, but I also spoke. So it was kind of a joint session. And the one in Vienna, I actually spent quite a bit of time with him. We had dinner afterwards. but I can see sort of similarities because he's very much in the abstract and theoretical. And then he looks at, is there practical elements of where I could take theory into practice, but practice in a way that impacts the world, or some fundamental understanding that will impact the world, though he tends to stay in the abstract space. And so I can see the intersection between what he does and other people like him and what you're trying to do, and you're trying to take it into the practical. So I'm kind of live brainstorming because I'm getting to know you better during the interview. Let's segue then into another topic, and this other topic is, what are the areas that really are you keenly interested in? And this doesn't have to be from a practical standpoint, just areas that are really of interest to you. And it could be things like uh, quantum computing, perhaps, or maybe the meaning of consciousness, or um, all of the planetary challenges that are out there. Do you think there's some correlation between all the planetary challenges? It could be something like what Roger Penrose is suggesting, where he doesn't think the universe is just started with the Big Bang and it's continuing. He has this sort of theory or idea that it's a series of Big Bangs and there's kind of no beginning or end. Or you get into some of the elements of string theory and the multiverse possibilities, but there isn't really a lot of um, experimental evidence to suggest that string theory is real, right? Well, there's a lot of experimental evidence to suggest that relativity is real or quantum mechanics is real, even though we may not fully understand all elements of quantum mechanics, but we use it in GPS and semiconductors or lasers, and even quantum computers are based on quantum mechanics, even though we may not have a full understanding of all the elements of it. What are these areas that interest you in the world today? Maybe it's AI machine learning, but this aspect of AGI, are we on the cusp of these large language models hitting AGI? Or maybe it's the convergence of exascale supercomputers with AI machine learning and quantum-inspired algorithms coming together to solve really big problems. Are there any of these areas that you pause that you really think about? And then I'm interested to hear some of your ideas in these kind of bigger, they have a lot of abstraction and theoretical elements to them, but there may be some implication to us from a practicality standpoint. So what are the things are you curious about?
Mm, um, I would say amongst what I've researched recently, the main question is that is all knowledge, is it possible to fully interconnect everything, or is there going to be areas which will always be disconnected from one another? Also, I've researched a lot on
So let's stop there. Let's investigate that. Because that's an interesting idea, right? Is all knowledge in some way? There's some correlation between knowledge, right? Some connection between all knowledge, or are there areas that are outside of that? And I can see that coming into some of the work that's being done in mathematics, right? And trying to see if there's connections between things, and then it sometimes appears like there isn't, and then some new mathematical paper comes out saying, well, no, there is some fundamental truth that's more general that connects these various elements. Um, so in that kind of thinking, then, which way are you leaning? Do you think that if you can, there's some general principle that connects everything, or do you think that we can't get to that general principle that connects everything? And do you think there will be some kind of fundamental mathematical basis to that?
um, what I've witnessed so far, but is that so starting from a general base of, let's say you have middle ground knowledge, you can go mainly two directions. You can go to look for the smaller details, or you can go and look for generalizations of everything. And I think you can set up constraints saying that if you go too high up on trying to understand everything, then there's not really a question anymore, because you still need to be I've set up general rules of what can be perceived as people as knowledge. I mean that if it's beyond your reach of perception, I considered that there was no real interest in the question being asked. And
But then is the constraint then a human being? It's like sometimes when I'm talking to people, I say, imagine a parrot on a fence. I mean, we know that parrots are more or other kinds of birds like corvids are more intelligent than we previously thought. They can problem solve, even though some of their brain structures are different. Or octopus, the distributed network system, their brains are different. I mean, their whole neural system, and that they can problem solve. Or some work saying that there's even computational effects even at the cell level, not even beyond neurons. Or there's work indicating that there's decision making occurring in distributed neurons that are in your spinal cord, independently of the brain. They're solving computational kind of problems, right? And they're doing some kind of computation. So, there's this idea that we generalize that it's beyond perception, but maybe we're limited. It's that parrot on a fence. Can a parrot on a fence contemplate quantum gravity collapse and what that means? You have these mass bodies, and you have some kind of quantum wave relationship and superposition, and then that superposition collapses. And what does that mean? And can you measure it in some way or see it? Or this experiment on entanglement, just even this latest one, sort of saying, taking starlight to guide this experiment on entanglement, and try to remove any possibility of interference occurring, a human kind of interference, which adds more evidence to entanglement. So is when we investigate these things, is that maybe we just don't have the cognitive ability? It just does not exist. And then we have to go and integrate with some kind of analog quantum zettascale supercomputer, which combines with some really advanced AI, machine learning, but maybe beyond the large language, almost some kind of hybrid system, which Jan LaCuna is always talking about. Hybrid systems are not, he thinks that maybe it's a dead end where LLMs are great. So maybe as we contemplate these things, it's beyond our capacities, like Ramanujan and the work that he did. I mean, even though it's 100 years ago, we still don't fully understand the implications of all of his work, right? And so, I mean, as we try to find some kind of meaning, and then we generalize, then we think the abstraction is so great that there isn't any meaning. We're abstraction too high, but then maybe it's because we just don't have the ability to see, and then from there to derive the specifics that proves everything else. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that there's, we're humans, but there's some cognitive limit, right? Homonyms that existed for over 1 million years, and different versions of us, right? There's Neanderthal or Denisovans to Homo sapien. And yet now we're discovering they had larger brains than we thought, and maybe their ability to tool make when things are greater. Maybe it's
Yeah.
their cognitive ability, right? So
Well, I believe that, of course, there are always cognitive limits to what we can do at a moment, but in general, if you just have a question about a subject, about entanglement, what the implications of are they? If you then the question is sometimes to put on the subject all the questions and all the possibilities that you are currently able to connect to that subject, which you don't know, you still don't have the details. Sometimes you are forced to stay at a level of understanding that is unsatisfactory. And so you have several options, but one of them is to trying to improve on all the questions that you might be able to ask on that precise subject. Usually I tend to go and try to improve the way I ask myself the question. How can you perceive the subject better? Are you sure that you are just looking at the raw information that there is? And once you know you are, then it's a matter of try to experiment on something else which is closely related, if we don't understand already all the implication that there might be on the subject, then the question is perhaps, how do we rethink everything that is around it, that we are trying to connect our understanding of that to? Perhaps it's the other bits of knowledge that we are trying to get answers to that need a complete reshaping of how we're thinking about them. And if you I remember having that question when trying to first understand quantum physics, is that I had to reshape every notion that I had of every concept in physics. And what does it mean to have certainty about the way normal usual mechanics were functioning? Then you realize that the notion of certainty has to be reshaped. And then it's after that you have then you might also end up changing your point of view on what to do with what I'm seeing, what I'm observing of this phenomenon. What can I do to view it in a different way? Perhaps I can get better understanding, but I have no idea why, how, and perhaps I just need to change how I see it. And then, but in general, I know that because you cannot really change your great wish to be, you just keep wanting to understand that phenomenon. And then if, I don't know, then you might end up changing why you want to know about it, or you might end up creating a new tool to understand it, or to then let's say that another species is more able to understand the concept that you are currently trying to understand, then you will end up developing a new link to whatever is needed for you to answer a question. And so whatever is still needed to be, whatever understanding is needed to be deepened right now is we have still no idea whether we will find a simple answer that will fit the type of questions we are asking to this bit of lack of understanding, if we might find a simple answer, or if we will realize that we need to change our whole view of the general things to be able to view it better. You never know how strong what you're trying to understand is end up going to be. I mean, of course, I hope that the answer will be sufficiently simple to be nicely integrated, but I also believe that's how scientific communities evolve, and that's how, whatever way, if it ends up being a challenge, then that's what we want. That's why we're looking for things. That's why we're putting energy into studying. We are definitely not made to be recreating absolutely what happened in the past. So if we find that there is something that is completely beyond our abilities to understand, then we will just take a little while to adapt, but I'm sure it will be done, perhaps, yeah, sooner or later.
So, so we talked about this idea of knowledge and connection, and is there some kind of knowledge graph that somehow intersects with all of them, some kind of edge, right, in these nodes? Let's and whether we generalize or we get to and we go into kind of a reduction into something that's a little bit more concrete. What other ideas are you exploring? And we just spent, I don't know, 15 minutes just talking that one. So we'll just explore, just as an introduction, maybe 2 or 3 other ideas that you think are really interesting, but we won't have time to explore them more deeply.
Of course. Another idea is that I'm on the look for the question to, is the human body having naturally have some basic element that it considers it is composed of? What I'm more talking about the mind. I was interested in innate memory that exists within all human beings, that we have concepts that exist nearly at birth. And what are those concepts precisely? Can we define them? We all have an understanding of a positive emotion, a human face, and we also have an innate concept of a group of people of beyond pain and pleasure, concept of a social groups. And those concepts are just made to be used, so they are nearly immediately complexified when humans grow up. But I was greatly interested in the fact that defining those base concepts, which are nearly physically created with the physicality of the brain, that are how can that be used to then build upon it a new way of mapping general human behavior, but also human health and in general to have a better understanding of the brain also. Because I ended up observing that because I was looking for the lowest energy point, the things that require nearly no energy for the mind to sustain. And looking at how when if you completely exhaust the body, there will still be some points which will bring in more energy than use it. At least the brain considers it as such. And I ended up looking at those because I was comparing the amount of energy used within the day to when it got close to those precise points, it ended up being more efficient and kind of changing the way of how the brain was functioning. And the fact that those basing points were something that were I would say a physical reality. I would love to have more scientific research on that, of course, but and having general statistics of how much how closely related between every humans those are, how much is it present? I mean, is it in everyone around, or are there wild differences between people on those? I already know that they are not really that. There are still those basic points in basically everyone. I see so many problems in general that are about how do we use the possibilities that we have energy-wise or money-wise into how do we satisfy people? How do we satisfy people at a small scale or at a large scale? And when you have a good base point on what data to enter to solve those problems, it usually goes way smoother. And so obviously it's still within the dream phase, but if I just could use those advances in neuroscience to be able to find a new way on how to think about general problem on how to use energy or how to use money to solve this kind of satisfaction for people, or how to balance a general situation. I would love for that to happen. So yeah, I will keep working on that.
Okay, so I'm just kind of thinking about what you're talking about. So you feel there's some kind of ancestral memory, and I would suggest maybe that's encoded into our DNA, so it gets inherited, and it's species specific, but there could be more of a general knowledge base or some kind of understanding that is across all species, that is fundamental to all life. And then you get divergences depending on the kind of life that there is. And then you can get some of that's very specific to human beings. So we would have the culmination of things that all life has. And as we move up the tree or down the tree of life, once that go from the very general to more specific until ultimately it's in human beings. And that encoding then gives us some kind of innate capabilities and understanding. It's like we're born with some capabilities, right? It's like a computer has a chip in it, and that chip is pre-programmed to start the boot process, which then loads the operating system, which then allows you to work with the computer, but it's all pre-built. It's like pre-programming. And in fact, computers are built with some of this pre-programming, and then the software overlays on top of that software could be like conditioning through life. So you're indicating that there's some of this knowledge that we are ordained to have, we're born with, and that could be our tendency to acquire language and use and communicate amongst each other. But you see some of this in insects as well. It's just different form and different manifestation. There it could be more like a hive kind of capability, like in bees or ants. But here, there's some sort of broader knowledge, but there's also sort of a singular that we bring. And then you're trying to mine the understanding of what this is, what are these fundamentals, and you're correlating that with even brain states. So at heightened levels, our brains consume a lot of energy, but at base levels, it consume less energy. And there's things that are there even at less energy. If you were to deterministically understand all of this, then you could take it into the practical and create practical solutions or enhance the way that people behave, or if you want to address things like learning, how people learn, or how to address the human condition from a behavioral standpoint, then you could create tools and ways to help address people. So even from the broader sense to the more narrow sense, there's a lot of applications to this, and the understanding could be quite fundamental to enhancing all life in some way. Did I conceptualize that correctly, sort of what you're saying?
Yes, yes. I mean, we have tools already that we use for decision making. But I mainly look around other scholars that I pass by at university, and they used tool based on what was used in. Everything is based on what has been historically thought of as true, and of course there's our great stuff to be found in that. But if I believe that if we know that let's say, for learning, if we see that it is systematic, that a way of teaching is not working properly, and we have used all the ideas that came from the base data that we use from historic sources, and how to organize learning. And it is still not working as well as it should be, then perhaps sometimes the raw data needs to be more clear. And perhaps we can completely think about the base raw system that we use to make it more efficient. And I was thinking about this phylogenetic memory, actually, to set up a better, just a more biologically based system of understanding what is natural to humans and to life in general, what is still going to be there after many changes, or what is resistant to education. So if we have a system that is just new and just another one that is simple to understand, then even if it can be helpful a little bit to decision making, or if we have a new way to look at things, even if it's slightly next to what we have, it will broaden possibilities immensely. And so, yeah, completely not looking at what has been done in the past and trying to ask questions about how can I link what I observed in a way that makes sense with many types of observation, and how can I link what has been done in neuroscience to explain general human impulses. Is it's a little bit of a game. You try to not get too blocked by the fact that there are people who have been doing the same kind of political decision for years and years and centuries. And if you consider that you might end up finding the same exact result by looking at completely another set of data, but you also might end up looking at another decision. Yeah, finding a new way based on the new research that we are finding thanks to your neuroscience, it will only strengthen what we already, the type of decision we're making, or completely finding another way to do it. So yeah, that is worth it.
Yeah, and then there's an analog or an example in precision personalized medicine, right? So it used to be you have a therapeutic and you just apply it mass to the population. Excuse me. But now we know that there's differences based on gender. So people who identify in this sort of diversity of gender out there, there's differences in how you react to therapeutics. And then they realize that it even gets to the genetics, the genes that you have. And each of us have a different sort of genetic kind of component, or there's individual differences. So, and because there's a much deeper understanding of genetics, then you can get a very personalized, precise way of addressing the not only the diagnostics of your health situation and preventatives for your health situation, but you can also then be very precise in the application of therapeutics to you that can be very tailored to your genetic structure as well, right? And then you get a much higher, a better outcome. if we have this fundamental understanding of humans and learning and so on and behavior, even from a genetic standpoint, and that then you can have a much more precise, personalized way of addressing behavior and decision making and so on. So, and so that's my way of sort of talking about what I believe the direction you're going in. We don't have time to look at each one of these areas, so we'll stop here. But these are interesting areas that you're thinking about, and you have an interesting journey. So thank you for coming in and sharing your journey and your insights with our audience. Oh, and I should ask maybe one final question. What recommendation do you want to give to my audience?
Do I want to give two?
What recommendation or advice do you want to leave my audience?
Oh, keep searching. Please put energy into all of your trials, all of your ideas. And develop, I don't know, generally develop all scientific research. The more you look into it, the more you realize that even though internet brought an overflow of information, if you remove everything that is not purely interesting to you, there are always just a tiny bit left, and it's always incredibly worth it to develop whatever little detail you believe is going to lead to something incredible. And I also think that it is a perfect time to take risks to projects, to ideas, and to get into the opposite way of everything that is generally happening out there. Very general advice, but it's always a great idea to still be expressing it in a very straightforward way. Yeah.
So I'm going to interpret my understanding of what you're saying from a recommendation standpoint. So you're saying be freely exploring different ideas, and for example, I read every day, maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, and I tend to read on the outlier material. Outlier meaning those that are challenge conventional thinking. So I hear that you're suggesting explore and think that challenge conventional thinking, new kinds of thinking, and new kinds of research, because you're going to learn from that. In fact, I just did a fireside recently with Bernard Kozlik, quite a famous investor, and he talks about that. Just thinking outside of the box, in essence, and reading research that's outside of conventional thinking. I'm hearing that you're saying ask questions, but counterfactual questions. And that lends to what Judea Pearl, his work in AI and machine learning and so on, kind of laid the base. And that was about counterfactual thinking, counterfactual being you have a series of facts that ultimately came to a decision. But what if you approach it from a different way? What if you said, well, what if I use a different way of thinking to this problem, counter to the facts, alternative ways of thinking to this problem? What could be the possible outcomes? So exploring other paths to problems and questions, and not just that one path to the goal. So kind of counterfactual thinking. I'm hearing from you to run experiments. It could be thought experiments to test your ideas out. your hypothesis and bringing these all together. And you're recommending to the audience to do that. Did I capture what you're saying?
Yes. And I believe that everything that I said just comes naturally when you try to test if everything that you learn, is it true? How can I test whether it is true or not? And some questions are incredibly difficult. Some are much more easy to test. But then when you constantly put energy into trying to test whether every idea that you have in your mind, is it true or not, then that's when it becomes easier to create your own understanding of everything, because it takes up so much time and effort to test out every bit of knowledge that it pushes you to make your own things. And I believe that's a great way to see all knowledge that is out there on the internet, especially all knowledge that is now so easy to acquire. Everything that you learn by your daily readings, being fed with information all the time. I believe that's a great way to react to all this flood of information that most people constantly have nowadays, is set up your own independence and test it all out. And I advise everyone to do so. It gives an incredible new flow, and it makes you relevant to add up to everything that you see.
So yeah, so what I'm hearing is that we basically have an unlimited ability to ferret out information, drill down, but you have to approach it with critical thinking, of course, with empathy, with self-agency and accountability as well, because there's a lot of noise out there, so not good information, but there's basically unlimited information, so investigate that information. And investigating that information and then getting into the root of creativity and innovation is called combinatorial thought. And that is combining different things and finding the links between different ideas. It's almost like random knowledge graphs, right? You have these different kind of knowledge points, and then you look at connections between these different knowledge points, edges between these knowledge points, and by doing so, you can develop skills and then maybe even greater insights. So the root of creativity and innovation is combinatorial thinking. But to do combinatorial thinking, you have to be to combine different diverse ideas together and into kind of new ways of thinking or new ways of innovation. And then you test these ideas out, right, in a programmatic way, to see what's nonsense, what's not. And you may change your ideas of what's nonsense and what's not as you get more information out there, but to be open to that combinatorial thinking. So, those are great pieces of information. I can definitely relate to what you're saying. So thank you. And I realize now that we could probably have spent a day exploring each one of your ideas, mining it, going into more detail, but we don't have the day. But that's fascinating. I'm glad that we took some extra time to go and explore some of the ideas that you're thinking about, because they're really interesting ideas, which you're turning into practical ways of implementing and concrete ways of moving the world forward. So I can see why you were introduced to me, because you were introduced as this phenomenon who has just an amazing way to bring ideas onto the table and think about it in a deep reflective way. I'm glad I had the opportunity to mine some of this with you today, and I could see the roots there for sure. And so thank you for sharing our insights.
It made me greatly happy to have this interview. I couldn't be more thankful. Thank you again. That was great. Yeah. 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 I cannot wait to develop more of my ideas. And yes, maybe I'll change path completely in the type of ideas I will develop in the next few years. I think I will definitely get more practical in my testings than in staying in this general human behavior. But I'm still extremely excited to find more people to have interesting chats like we just did now.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to give you a recommendation back to you, and it's to the audience as well. There's a researcher by the name of Patty Mays um, at MIT Media Labs, and she's got a remarkable young team she put together. There's a young researcher by the name of Pat, and we call him Pat because he's Thai, but I think you would enjoy reaching out to Patty Mays and Pat, and to her entire team and exploring some of your work. So how do you do that, or how the audience could do that? Just search up my name and Patty Mays at MIT Media Labs. I've done interviews with her team, and I did a Forbes article. The Forbes article is probably about 60 pages long, so it's a very long article. I think you'll find interesting ideas of the things that she's working on. So she also thinks in the deep scientific way as well, very multi-stakeholder to multidisciplinary to transdisciplinary. So sort of the ultimate integration, right? And she's exploring that human connection as well. And I think you'll find what she's doing, but especially with some of her team, really, really interesting. So just search on Patty Mays Forbes, my name, and you'll see the articles and the interviews. And I think you'll find their work really interesting. And then reach out. They're very inclusive. So just reach out and say, this is the things I'm working on, the things I'm interested in. And I think if you were able to collaborate, you'd find it very interesting to work with them. So.
Yes, I'll definitely reach out to her. Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.